So yes, where do you start? Your head's going to be filled with lots of ideas and thoughts. You're going to be reading, and not only that, you're going to be thinking about what you might want to write about whilst you're reading. Don't forget our reading list, 95% of it is electronic, available through the module Moodle site. So, when you're reading for an assignment, try and approach it in an academic way. In other words, don't read everything. So many people, including myself, will look at an article, see something else interesting when you're doing a search, and then think, oh, I'll have a look at that. And the next thing you know is you're off reading and something very interesting, but it isn't actually about mentorship. Scan for those keywords, then see if it draws your interest in. Read the introduction and the summary. This often gives you an idea of what it might be like and whether or not it's worth you reading in detail, or whether or not you want to use it for your assignment. Please look at the way articles are written as a guide on how to write academically. There are many links on the Moodle site to help you review how you read for assignments, for example, and you can go to the site and click on this one. So your essay is no more than 2,000 words. There is no allowance for above or below. If you've used 5 or 6 words to finish a sentence, that's absolutely fine, but please don't fall into the trap, because 5% is deducted for assignments that are more than 2,000 words. You are expected to critically reflect and evaluate your performance as a mentor in supporting work-based learning and assessing. It's got to centre on the module learning outcomes and your relevant professional standards. So if you're a nurse and midwife, it's the Standards Supporting Learning and Assessing in Practice, NMC. If you're a registered healthcare professional, then it's the HCPC 2012 Education Standards. Copies of these are in your handbook. In addition to that, it's got to reflect contemporary literature. It's really important to remember that it isn't necessary for us to know where you work, the names of your colleagues, and certainly if you're going to write about an episode you've had with a student or a learner, then they have not given permission to use them in your assignment. So please do not refer to them by name in the essay. It's a good idea at the very start, where you're putting your information about yourself, the word count, is to write a disclaimer saying that you have created a pseudonym for individuals that you're going to talk about. It's very, very important. Both the university and the professional governing body, HCPC or NMC, take this quite seriously, and any breach does receive a 0 mark, so please make it clear. Very clear. Now, I said it's not necessary for you to state where you work, but if you want to put something into context, I work in a busy acute hospital, I work as a community nurse, or I work in a GP practice, or I work in a theatres, that's fine. But no more than that, no names, nothing we can identify things by. I've already spoken about the word count. I just need to remind you again, because people do fall into the pitfall. It is one of the assignment criteria that you're going to be marked against, and yes, 5% will be deducted for exceeding the limit. That is exclusive of any headings or titles that you have, if you have text boxes and your reference list at the end, but it does include references that you cite in your assignment. If your work is more than 10% below the word limit, it is unlikely to contain enough material to merit a pass grade, so be very careful. If you're struggling, please contact your tutor and they can advise you on how to work this out. Similarly, if you're over the limit, again, contact your tutor. They will be able to advise you on where you can make amendments to bring it in correctly. So you can write in first or third person. It is acceptable. It is your choice. Third person is where you're talking about the author. The author said, or the author did. First person is I. However, we don't need I did this, I did that, and don't think I did this, that and the other. So think about the together, we, or. Stand back and say, it is important to supervise students in clinical practice to ensure they understand and can demonstrate their competencies. Nothing wrong in framing things in that way. So why do we use others' work to reference and cite? Well, it does give an academic view of the subject and the range of opinions to consider and research to help you judge them. But it does show that your ideas are based on an established and respected body of academic literature, making sure that the points you're putting forward, the academic argument, is underpinned, and it is one of the criteria you will be assessed against. So we're referencing to show readers how you came to the conclusion. It shows that you've read a variety of sources, and it enables also the reader to find those sources to have a look at, and it gives credit to the original authors, and it avoids plagiarism. So plagiarism is copying without acknowledgement. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this in a minute. So an assignment doesn't include references, can't be claimed to be a serious piece of work. You may lose marks or fail your assignment if you don't submit your reference list, and please don't forget to do so. People do, and it's such a shame. Or if you don't use many references. They must be accurate and consistently recorded in alphabetical order and the back of your work. It's something that people leave till the last thing to do. Please be careful if in your work you may well have wanted to use something, but later on you've decided to take it out, but you've forgotten to take it out of the reference list. Your assessor will look to see that all your citations are in the reference list and all the references on your reference list you've cited in your work. So please pay that attention to detail at the end. So what should academic work have in common? Well, there's a good grounding in research, so you've looked at the evidence. It is backed up by that evidence. You've used a good range of references. It's structured well. It's formal English. Think about colloquialisms or nurse speak, as I call it. Think that your reader is not necessarily a clinician in your area. Please get it proofread, spell checked and proofread. It can be read by somebody who has no idea what you're writing about. You're just asking them, do my sentences look well structured? Are my paragraphs appropriate? So let's talk a little bit more about references. So there's several ways of referencing, and paraphrasing is one of the most common, and also summarising. Paraphrasing and summarising means you are interpreting something in your own words, demonstrating your assimilation of the work you're reading. So what's here is somebody highlights the importance of first contact service user. Then you're putting your comments. It's central because, or if you're summarising, various studies have shown that first contact between service users can work to be professional. For example, so I consider this to be blah blah blah. Don't forget the sources are cited in this way, and don't forget the reference list. So we use Harvard referencing. On the Moodle site there is a link to all about Harvard referencing. If you feel that this is an area of your difficulty for you, please speak to your tutor. I want to draw your attention to secondary referencing. That is referring to a source that has been cited in another piece of work you have read or a book. At degree or master's level, you are expected to have read the original work and drawn your own conclusions. Similarly, quotations. Again, it is expected that you convert what you've read into your own words, thinking, expression, as we've just seen. Quotations should only be used after careful consideration, and they need to be fully referenced if you do so. But it doesn't reflect your ability to analyse, judge, evaluate and discuss the merits and deficits and interpreting what you've read in your own words, which is what we're looking for level 6. I mentioned plagiarism earlier, so copying without acknowledge. There's several types of plagiarism. One is called contract plagiarism, paying for an essay to be written. There are many websites that offer this service. People sell their essays on eBay, for example. If it's suspected, you are awarded a 0 and it's investigated, and it calls into your professional integrity into question, which means we would report it to your employer, who may well report it to professional regulatory body, and people have been removed from the professional register for plagiarism. Now, most often people plagiarise because they can't paraphrase or summarise well. However, we have had people that have copied colleagues' work and submitted it as well, without their colleague knowing, kindly sharing their essay to see what it's like. However, unfortunately, it came to light. There's a little video on YouTube telling you a lot more about plagiarism, so please go onto the site and look at it and digest. So we've been asking you to write reflectively. It isn't necessary to use a reflective model. You can critically reflect on your mentoring without it. If you use a model, please don't waste words discussing models. Just say, I chose this model because it's what suits me. Be very, very careful about writing conversationally, as if you're talking to me, being descriptive. Don't just explain what happened. You need to be analytical. So using a model, you would have a little bit at the beginning, which is the description. This could just be a paragraph, literally a paragraph, and then you can build it and explore and bring things in as you critically evaluate. Most marks are gained for the analysis section of a model, so just be very, very careful and don't fall into this trap. So do explain what interpretation you're making of what happened, and look at linking the body of literature and the evidence and professional mentoring to the things that you've raised and how they may be tackled, or how they are common with other people who have written things about this particular topic area. Don't forget to conclude with recommendations for future practice. That's really important because that closes the reflective loop, the cycle. So we're asking you to be critical in your analysis. So bring out the essential elements, judge or evaluate what you're reading. What are the merits and deficits? If you're looking at, maybe, yes, okay, so-and-so said something, but actually what was it based on? Have they missed something? What's good about what they're saying? Academic arguments, so, putting your position and actually interrogating the literature and exploring it, so it demonstrates your wide reading. We've asked you to write a draft outline of around 250 words, telling us what area you're exploring, what professional standards you're going to be looking at, and some of the literature you might be using. That helps us. You can, however, send a draft, first page, or send a section of your work and ask us to comment. We cannot read whole pieces of work. If you send it to us, we will return to you without reading it, saying we need to know what section of it you want. You can do this up to 1 week before hand-in date. This is for two reasons. One, essentially, if you've done a dog's dinner, 1 week's notice to try and sort it out is quite a tall order. The other reason is we're not allowed to do this because we will prejudge what you're doing, and actually if it's a draft, 1 week before hand-in again is a tall order for you to complete on time. Getting stuck is quite difficult. We've all been there and we do understand. You could spend all day and actually fiddling around, writing this, reading that, and end up with a paragraph or 6 lines. It's very frustrating. It does make you, get quite stressy, so just be careful. So think about some of the things that you could do. My best advice is to walk away from it for a day or so, just saying that's it, and then come back to it. But you could discuss it with other people. Maybe people like to do free writing, just blurt everything out in your head, or using post-it notes and then move them around and prioritise. Go and read something completely different, or watch that soap opera on the telly and come back to it. It is so hard to get started, and it's hard on days where you're struggling, when that huge pile of ironing or the cupboard under the stairs seems to tidy, seems highly more attractive than getting on with your work. But you can ask your tutor questions. Students email me time saying, this is what I'm thinking of doing, is that okay? So, just because we see a draft doesn't mean to say if you want to run a question past us, we won't say no, we'll give you advice. We'd rather you do that. We really would. So when you're thinking about and reviewing what you're doing, it really needs to address the module outcomes, but it doesn't have to be directly about them. You can talk about writing a section about each specified outcome, and it's quite difficult to do that. It becomes disjointed, and if you did little headings, you might write too little about, or too much about too little, or too little about too much. So it is difficult sometimes to include all of those things, but essentially you need to go through them as a checklist at the end, saying, have I talked about assessment? Have I looked at facilitating of learning? Have I made sure I've included the standards? Have I linked my work to the standards? Just go through the checklist and just be sure. But if you don't meet the assessment criteria, you're not going to pass. And the assessment criteria is a critical reflection on your mentoring practice, linked to the education mentoring standards, using contemporary literature and within the word limit. In the handbook, there is guidance on how we grade your work, what we look for when we're grading, what sort of levels you could expect your work to be assessed at. I'm reminding you again to make sure it meets the module learning outcomes, and that you conclude with recommendations for future mentoring practice, either for yourself or the profession or the organisation. This is really, really important. These are some of the things that people sometimes forget to do. Make sure you keep a copy of the work for yourself. It will not be returned to you in any way, shape or form. Make sure if you're handing it in to the university, you have a stamped addressed envelope, or make sure your tutor has your email address. If you're handing it in electronically, then that's all well and good. Your results will be posted on the site you submit to. It's really important when things get difficult for you. If you've had, we don't wish it on anybody, but you may have an accident, or you may have an illness, or you may change your job, or work pressures are causing problems and it's difficult for you to complete the work by the deadline. Please talk to your tutor. They will be able to help you with submitting extenuating circumstances to enable you more time to do the work. And very often when we do this with students, you get over whatever it is that's interfering with your ability to complete the assignment by the deadline, and you can come back to it and complete when things are on a more even keel for you. So, even though this is a video recording, please ask questions, seek support, feel equipped to achieve, and of course, yes, this is on the site. And remember, we're here to help you. We wish you luck, and we look forward to reading your work. Thank you.